And Beth, without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm just working on getting my screen up. Good morning, everybody. It's great to have you here listening, and I hope you enjoy the talk. I have collected insects from about the age of 6 to 18, at which point I went off to college and didn't run around in the fields collecting insects. My mother got me involved in a 4-H program, which has an entomology unit at a young age. And I was fortunate enough to work with Penn State entomologists with identification and took correspondence courses and ended up being the state winner in the entomology program when I was 16. So my first love actually is insects. I went on to get a master's in ecology from Michigan State. I actually did my research in tropical ecology down in Costa Rica and then joined the Peace Corps. But all along I've gardened and I've observed, and I'm sharing some of that with you today. And I hope for a number of things. I'm going to do a quick review of the Lepidoptera. That is the order of insects that include moths and butterflies. I hope you get an understanding of the importance of this insect order in our ecosystem in particular. I hope you become concerned over the loss of insects in population and biomass that is going on worldwide. And I hope you deepen your understanding of host plants for supporting the moths and butterflies on Cape Cod. I expect a number of you have already delved into that on your own. But, you know, you can always learn more. All right. So my title is Beyond Monarchs and Milkweed because, as we all know, the monarch is sort of the poster child of our ecosystem in the United States. It has an amazing story. It has the larvae and the adults are inedible to birds. It feeds only on milkweed. So it shows a number of attributes of the Lepidoptera, but it is one small piece of our ecosystem, partly because they can't be eaten by birds. And they are a fairly small population. And they also have incredible pressures on them since they do migrate to Mexico from here. Okay, let me see if I can, for some reason, there we go. So quick, some of this is just a quick review to try to get everybody on the same page. So the Lepidoptera are an order of insects, and they're known as the scaled wings. The two Greek words were put together for this order. They are generally divided into butterflies and moths. And characteristics of butterflies is that they have slender bodies. And these are generalizations, and there are exceptions. They are generally diurnal. They're brightly colored. Their chrysalis is their hardened skin. That's their pupa stage. They have clubbed or hooked antennae, which is helpful at times when you're trying to decide whether a moth flying around during the day is a butterfly or not. And they rest in general with their wings upright. Moths, on the other hand, are thick-bodied. They're generally nocturnal. The majority are drab in color. They spin a cocoon or pupate underground or under leaf litter. They have feathery antennae, a few of them, but most of them have hair-like antennae that's very slender, and they rest with their wings flat or horizontal across their body. 2 surveys have been done, one by Mark Mello, who wrote a book called Butterflies Across Cape Cod, which is a wonderful resource. And 73 species have been described in Barnstable County. Recently, a survey was done for the last 300 years of moths that have been described in Barnstable County, and that is 1,685 species. So you can see there are, you know, factors of 10 more moths than butterflies in our county. I'm also going to put a little caution here because that includes a lot of different ecosystems. So certainly in your more diverse hardwood forests of the Upper Cape, you would find more moth species than we're going to find here in Chatham or farther down to the Outer Cape because we have fewer diversity in our host plants. Also, some of these species do include introduced species, such as the gypsy moth, now called the spongy moth, or even our winter moth, or any of the ones that have come in and had a population explosion. Okay. So butterflies are represented by 6 families. I'm just going to go over them quickly. We have 4 swallowtails here on the Cape. That's the ones with the tails. That's an easy one. They're large, so they're easy to see. This one here is in the sulfur and white family. That family is probably most familiar to you from the white cabbage butterfly, which came from Europe and probably is our most common sighting during the summer. The little one down here are the coppers, hair streaks, and azures. That's a spring azure. They are very small butterflies. There are 19 different species of them on the Cape. The brush-footed butterflies, which are the painted ladies, American ladies, the browns, the question marks. There are 20 of them. They're lovely. They fly fast. Red Admiral is one that is still fairly common in our area. The monarch is its own family. There are 3 representatives in the United States, but we have only one of them here. And the skippers. And so quickly talking about the skippers, you will see a hooked antenna on here, but they are quite thick-bodied, you will see, and they fly more like a butterfly, but when they are resting, they actually hold their wings out a certain way. So they're the ones that sort of are a mix of moth and butterfly attributes. Okay, moths are represented by 50 families, and many, many, many of them are what we call little brown jobs. All right, if you're a birder, you know that. The moth order has thousands that are brown and kind of nondescript. As you can imagine, they fly at night. They don't need bright colors. They actually need to be camouflaged more to hide during the day. And there's a whole group that are microlepidoptera that are less than 1/4 of an inch large. Many of these are very hard to identify. Some of them you have to use a dissecting scope in order to figure out what the species are. However, we are lucky because there are some that are the fashionistas, all right? So even though the majority of the moths are drab, we love to see these in our ecosystem. And just like the monarch is the poster child for the butterflies, I would say the Luna is the poster child for the moths. A large silk moth. We have 12 different silk moths on the Cape. Just quickly to go through some of the more exciting families. The sphinx moth here, this actually is a hydrangea sphinx, which feeds on arborescens, hydrangea arborescens, native plant. The tigers, there are 25 different species on the Cape that are tigers, and they are all quite showy. And then the geometrids, this little green one over here. All right. They aren't all green. Most of them are brown or gray or black, but of course I picked out the green one, right? There are 102 species of those on the Cape. Okay, so a quick review. The interesting thing about butterflies and moths is that they go through complete metamorphosis. And this should be familiar to you. The egg is laid by the adults, usually on the host plant. They go through a number of stages where they shed their skin called instars. It depends on the species, how many instars they have. Then they pupate. There are various ways that moths and butterflies do this, and then they emerge again as an adult. And the reason I bring this up in particular is because there aren't a lot of animals that switch their habitat or their niche so drastically within their life cycle. So the niche is an ecology term, which talks about all the biotic and abiotic factors that might affect a species throughout its life. And you see that for the adult and the larva and the pupa, there are different pressures on its survival. So for instance, for the, weather affects all of them, and it's a huge factor. A lot of rain causes a lot more humidity and mold. Extreme cold temperatures can affect them during the winter. Drought will affect them. So populations as a whole are affected across the board in terms of weather. The host plant is needed by the adult for egg laying. The host plant's needed for eating by the larva. But very rarely does the pupa use the host plant. It actually usually moves away from it. The adult has predators of birds, bats, small mammals. The larva, birds, small mammals, and hornets, among others, and the pupa, small mammals in general. The adult has to deal with sexual reproduction, has to find mates. The larvae have to deal with parasites as well as predators. And the pupa in general is in a safe enough spot that it doesn't have that kind of parasitic effect. So they deal with a lot of strategies for protection, right? Certainly the adults have coloration as well as chemicals. I should have behavior on there also. The larvae have coloration behavior. The pupa has their cocoons and leaves, and many of the moths go under the soil to overwinter. So in terms of overwintering, something some of you may not know is that the different life stages of, depending on the species, might overwinter. So some of the adults overwinter as butterflies or moths. Some of the larvae do. In fact, a woolly bear was walking across my garage apron yesterday in the warm sun, and the pupa overwinter in leaf litter or soil. So this is a piece that's really important for the survival of the insect. In order to make it through a winter, they need those covers. And climate change is certainly going to affect the populations as well. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly show you some defenses in the adults, and I've pretty much stuck with the moths since we have almost 2,000 species of them here on the Cape. They frequently will mimic the tree bark or branches that they are on. So you see there is a moth hiding here on this bark. This one is flattened against the branch. So both behavior and coloring will do that. This one over here is hanging from a branch looking like a dead leaf. And they also frequently have spots, or under their second set of wings will be covered by camouflaged wings that if a predator is coming after them, they will flare those upper wings and show these spots or these bright colors in the hope that they scare off whatever is after them. Right. Now, the moths may be fairly drab and little brown jobbers, but the amazing part of moths is their caterpillars, is their larvae. Incredible diversity in them. And the nice thing these days is that you can get answers with the internet. And I encourage you all to get out and do some looking, because there are caterpillars out there everywhere. So defense in caterpillars, we'll start down here. This one looks like bird droppings, a fairly common technique in the moths and the butterflies. Oops, sorry about that. I go back. Hang on. There we go. They might curl up. This one's a very common response when they are found, as most of you probably know. The spice bush swallowtail larva here has big eye spots on it that are supposed to scare, right? The flannel moth down here is extremely hairy or furry, as are quite a few of the caterpillars. And again, if a bird has a choice, it's going to pick a caterpillar that's smooth rather than one that's hairy. And this caterpillar, this flannel moth caterpillar, also is extremely poisonous, which is not common, but it is a concern and something to be aware of if you're going to look at caterpillars. The black swallowtail caterpillar, some of you may have this in your garden. If you poke at it just gently, it will protrude those two orange horns at the top, clearly meant to scare you off. And then there is serious camouflage in the caterpillars, as you see on the stick. And also this one is a prominent. The amazing thing about this one is it starts out when it's little, it's green and with that same shape, but as the tree leaves age over the summer, it actually develops brown as well, and it feeds on the edges of the leaf, so it looks like a browning edge of the leaf. I mean, there are just amazing strategies that they have because there's enormous pressure on them in terms of predation. Okay, a couple more things that caterpillars can do. These are leaf miners up in this corner. Let me see if I can get to my right slide. They passed my notes. Okay. So this is an oak leaf miner. Those caterpillars actually are inside the leaf. So it is between the layers of the leaf, and they feed on the cells of the leaf, but keep those two outer layers of the leaf for protection. So each one of these little spots has a caterpillar, and that brown stuff you're seeing is their frass. That's the polite way to say poop or excrement, right? This guy down here is a leaf roller, an oak leaf roller, where they roll up the leaf with silk and hide in it and feed. And there you can see the pupa is hanging from the same leaf that it was hidden in. This one over here is a tiny, tiny little one called an American pistol case bearer. And most of that black is silk, but they actually decorate their little silken, it's not a cocoon, their silken house. And different individuals will decorate it in different ways. Pieces of flower, pieces of leaves, but clearly an attempt to stay hidden. Up in this corner, the bagworm covers itself again with silk and with needles and weeds and leaf bits in order to hide. This one may become more familiar to you. And down in the bottom right corner, this is the eastern tent caterpillar, where they feed communally in an enormous net that they build themselves. All right, so they have protection in numbers as well as that. So this is data that you may have come across before if you're a fan of Doug Tallamy's. If you haven't run into him before, I strongly encourage you to read some of his books. He is an entomologist at the University of Delaware and basically is director of a large research group, particularly with Lepidoptera. And most caterpillars in the trees in particular are nice green juicy morsels, right? They don't have any protection. They have a large amount of numbers, but you know, if they're found, they're going to get eaten. And Doug Tallamy's grad student did a research project on looking at how many caterpillars a nest of chickadees would need to survive through to being fledged. And the number comes in between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars per nest within a 150-foot radius. And that's just a phenomenal number. Phenomenal. All right. 96% of North American birds require insects in their diet. So it's not just chickadees, but basically young birds need them to fledge, and many of the older birds, you will see them also looking and hunting for them. By the way, I did forget, maybe Lauren mentioned it, but if you have any questions, we are going to take questions at the end. Okay. So to go back to something you probably saw a long time ago in your education, this is the energy pyramid. And you see here is where all the insects are located in terms of our ecosystem. And they are considered primary consumers. And they basically are nutrient recyclers. They're moving the nutrients up from the producers, all of the plants, to the next level, the predators. So along with the fact that they are nutrient recyclers, they also, 80% of flowering species are dependent on insects, and 75% of all of our crop species are dependent on insects. So another entomologist who is incredibly famous and started out as a specialist of ants and is a professor, probably emeritus at this point at Harvard, but from his long-term studies of ants, he moved into being a conservationist as well, and being an advocate for conservation of ecosystems. And he wanted to point out that if the insect populations collapse, then basically all the other species above them in that energy pyramid are going to collapse as well. So research has been going on, not as much in North America, but it is coming. But in Germany, a long-term study showed that 45% of insect species have declined since pre-industrial times. There's a 78% decline. There are other studies as well. There's a 78% decline in flying insects over the past 40 years, 75% in 27 years in flying insect biomass. And in the UK and Sweden, there's a 30 to 60% decline in populations over 4 decades. And there is a link at the end of my talk if anybody wants to go and read that overview of the research that's been done on that. So these are huge numbers, enormous numbers. And I think many of us that grew up with traveling at night will remember those big sphinx moths splatting into the windshield, or would remember seeing them fly across the road and go, what was that? Things have changed. And one of the difficulties with getting people active in terms of dealing with the changes that are going on in our world is their frame of reference. So if you drive at night now, you don't see all those moth species flying around, and you don't have silk moths hanging off your porch in the morning because the populations have declined. My husband, who grew up in Chatham, tells this wonderful story of going by the streetlights at night, and there would be huge silk moths flying around attracted to the streetlights. You really don't understand why moths are attracted to the streetlights, but they would be attracted to the streetlights. And below them would be a fox. And that fox would wait until the moths got tired, and he would have an easy, nutritious meal of moth bodies. And he'd snip off the wings and he would eat the moth. And it was like a perfect little meal for him. We don't see that anymore. In fact, I have yet, certainly lights have changed. Street lights have changed. Our lights on porches have changed. But there is a serious decline in what we can see at night anymore. In 40 years, we have gone from this property on the left being fairly typical here on the Cape to the property on the right. The property on the left has host plants. It has protection. When those weeds die down, it has places for insects to overwinter. And in the spring, it will again generate new host plants. The one on the right has no cover on the ground. The grass is most likely fertilized and herbicided. The hydrangeas are not native. The catmint probably attracts bees and butterflies, but that's the extent. There aren't any host plants in that yard. So Doug tell me, moving forward, he and his crew, his graduate crew, did a major survey of predation on plants in the Northeast. And what he found out was that 14% of plant species actually make up 90% of the caterpillar's diets, 14%. So actually very few of the plant diversity support the insect species. And so I have gone through and given you kind of the top 5 or 4 that support the most species here on the Cape. And these are the oaks, the cherries, the poplars, the maples, and the pines. The numbers themselves are from the Northeast region, so they are not broken down by Barnstable County, right? So you could probably cut them by at least by half, maybe even by 70%. So our shrubs, we have a number of these, and you will see again, they don't provide food for as many insect species or Lepidoptera species. These are specific to Lepidoptera, but they still provide nutrition for a great many insect species. Right. Willows, blueberries, and these are families that these are genera, so there may be more than one species here. And finally, flowering perennials, right? Solidago and goldenrods and asters are the top performers in terms of host plants. And then the next 2 are sunflowers and black-eyed Susans. So at this point in my talk, I really struggled because there are so many great plant, butterfly, and moth connections that I really, really was having a difficult time deciding what to do about it. And the bottom line is that here on the Cape, if you plant a native to Cape Cod, you are providing a host plant to an insect. That's a given. They evolve together. The plants and the insects, basically, especially the flowering plants, which is what we're talking about here, they evolved together when evolution began, and they have a relationship over the years. But the point is that if you are changing your gardening or adding things to your garden, there are certainly plants that you can add that are more valuable to the ecosystem than others. So I decided to just pick a few plants that are common to our area that people do frequently plant, and just show some of the moths and butterflies that use them. All right, so this is viburnum, a common species in our woods, and more people are putting it into their gardens. And the showstopper here is the hummingbird clearwing. It is a hummingbird mimic, right? Many people go, oh, what's that? It's a little tiny hummingbird, but it is a moth. You see the great big thick body, and it does not hold its wings over its body. And it actually has these kind of strong antennae, which might make you think it's a butterfly, but it is a moth, and it feeds on viburnums. So these are all moths that have a viburnum as a host plant. Right. I also like the names of some of these. All right. So down here we have the horrid zale. And up here we have the green marvel. And here we have the rose hook tip. Somebody had a sense of humor when they named these. These are common names, and clearly they have scientific names that are much more specific. And this is the chestnut schizura. There is a moth here, as you can see, pretending to be the end of the branch. So the next one I picked was Virginia creeper, because so many of us think of this as a weed. And yet, if we can leave it on at least on the edges of our properties, it climbs up into the trees and makes a beautiful red foliage in the fall. It supports 5 different sphinxes, and some of those are incredible. Here's the Pandora Sphinx and the caterpillar. Oops, here I go again. This is the Abbott Sphinx. This is the beautiful wood nymph, which is the larva of this adult. And here we have a copper underwing. So these are just 4 examples of some of the amazing moths that feed on Virginia creeper. And birds do feed on the seeds as well. One of my favorite plants is Enothera. It is not a favorite of everybody because it's a biennial. So it produces the main part of the plant 1 year, and the second year it flowers and seeds. But it has this lovely white lined sphinx over here that feeds on it. This one's feeding on it during the day. The caterpillar itself, by the way, all sphinx caterpillars have some sort of protuberance on the end of their bodies. That's how you can pretty much tell that they're a sphinx caterpillar. The primrose moth, right? And the pearly wood nymph down here in the corner, which is very much like the beautiful wood nymph, which I think is on the next page, or the last page. All right. Now, why don't people like this? Well, because they have it for 2 years and then it disappears and shows up somewhere else in their garden. But it does an amazing job of providing hosts for some of these amazing creatures. And willows. I specifically put this one in here because of the mourning cloak. The mourning cloak overwinters as an adult. If you're lucky and are out on a nice day in February, you might see it flying around in the woods. And it also has a behavior as a caterpillar where it actually stays together as a group for a long period of time. The old thought that schooling in fish helps protect against predators for the species, not necessarily the individual. Here we have the black-edged prominent caterpillar with its lovely tail sticking up in the air. And the adult is here to the right, the white and black with the markings. This little moth over here is called a striped chocolate tip. And I had to get this in somewhere. These are not caterpillars. Well, you might call them caterpillars, but they're not Lepidoptera. They are sawflies, and they can do an amazing job on eating, as you can see, but they are great food for the birds. So that's just a caution that not everything that you see that looks like a caterpillar is a caterpillar. All right, and one last mention, there are generalists in the Lepidoptera world. For the most part, species are specific to a genera or to a family of plants. Most of them are specific to a particular genera of plants, but a few of them are generalists. And I think as I went looking for this, I think they're the ones that people are more likely to have seen because they have more host plants available. So one of our absolute favorite ones is the Cecropia. It feeds on woody plants. It prefers prunus species, so cherries in particular. It likes buttonbush, for those of you that are starting to add some shrubs to your gardens. But it's an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous plant. Overwinters, rolled up in a leaf, hanging from the tree, and its caterpillar is over here to the right. All right. Decided to put on the woolly bear. That is the larva. It takes more than a year to grow, and the moth itself is called the Isabella tiger, right? It eats both woody and weedy plants. So no wonder we see it more commonly than many of the others. A butterfly here, very unusual for a butterfly to be a generalist. It will feed on prunus, cherries, shadbush, blueberries, oaks. It is the striped hair streak. And this little caterpillar over here is its larva. They look like little tanks when they roll along the leaf. You can't see their legs or anything else. They just move like a tank. The IO moth, one of our lovely moths that are here locally, feeds on woody and weedy plants. Again, is a generalist, and its caterpillar has highly poisonous stingers on it. Stingers, not really stingers, but hairs. And And finally, the giant leopard moth. This caterpillar also takes a couple of years to develop. It is striking when it curls up because those red stripes are shown in greater color. And the moth itself is about 3 inches across. So it's a good sized moth. They like violets, dandelions, lilacs, plantain. So again, there are some species of Lepidoptera that feed generally rather than being so host specific. I'm not going to leave the Lepidoptera without talking about pests. Okay, so this is one of my favorite moths, and it's one that any gardener is familiar with that grows tomatoes. It is a native of North America. It's called the five-spotted hawk moth. It's a sphinx, if you see the little horn over here on the caterpillar. And they have great coloring to hide amongst your tomato plants, but they eat enough leaves that after a while you notice that they're there. However, I challenge you as to whether they eat so many leaves that you can't leave them be. I've been involved with growing tomatoes since I was little, because we had a big garden and on my parents' property, and we always had tomato hornworms. And I have to admit that we either collected them and put them in a jar and let them pupate so we could get them off the next spring, or we probably got rid of them. But I don't ever remember having such an infestation that they really would have affected our tomato harvest. These little white cocoons on the outside here are the pupa of a parasitic wasp, a verconid wasp. The female lays the eggs inside the caterpillar. She has a great little ovipositor, and she basically pokes a hole in the caterpillar when it's little and lays eggs. Yeah, more than one. And they develop inside the caterpillar. And yes, the last stage of the caterpillar, they kill it, all right? But this is the final pupal stage of the wasps, and little teensy tiny wasps will emerge from there. Part of the ecosystem. So an amazing story of the intricacy of native species and how they have adapted to each other. Certainly, we deal with introduced pests, and I mentioned that earlier. And that's a problem because they don't have the limits on their population growth that species do that have co-evolved within an ecosystem. But there are booms and busts, as we well know, with the spongy moth. And certainly back in the 70s, there was loss of trees when they first did one of their massive booms. But fortunately, the last one we had 4 or 5 years ago, the trees all pretty much bounced back from it. So, oops, here we go. What am I trying to do here? All right. So these are my hope for your takeaways. All right. I'm going to show you my resources in a minute. I am toying with the idea. When I was growing up, I used to go out at night with my mom and sister, and we would paint a sugaring solution on trees and wait a couple hours and see what showed up. And we would also take a white sheet out with a light and have moths be attracted to it. And I am probably going to do one of those, at least one of those this summer with the Conservation Foundation. So I hope some of you will be curious and show up for that. I'm very curious to see what I can find here on the Cape, because one of my whines, it's kind of a whine, is that the Cape isn't nearly as diverse for insects as where I grew up. I grew up in southern Pennsylvania. But there is still plenty here, and there's still plenty to support. The Conservation Foundation is doing a celebration of Arbor Day and Earth Day, and they will be the Friends of Trees will be giving away oaks. And I encourage you all to find a place to put an oak. They take forever to grow. but as soon as they start producing leaves, they are supporting insect populations. If you do plant an oak, I strongly encourage you to put a fence around it so the rabbits and the deer don't eat it before it gets big enough so it's out of harm's way. If you're trying to plant flowering natives, you need to plant more than 1 or 2 in your garden because they need to be found. And they need to be a mass of that particular plant in order to attract and support the Lepidoptera species. All right, so just a few things along those lines. You notice as a slide, I put in greenbrier. Greenbrier has an enormous, that was another one I was going to put a slide on, but it has a number of insects that are supported here on the Cape. So it's not as nasty. You know, I'm thinking edge. If you can put an edge on your property that you just kind of let go, it's a great thing to do. And yes, poison ivy also is a host plant. Okay, so my final slide is a few of the resources. As I mentioned earlier, the Mark Mello and Tor Hansen's book, which you can still get from the Natural History Museum through the Natural History Museum, is a wonderful resource. He talks about places to go, find butterflies, host plants, has pictures and descriptions. I can't say enough good things about it. There are a number of websites that have ID. You can submit a photo and they will ID it for you. This particular resource is what I used. It is for all of Massachusetts, but I extracted the material on Barnstable County. And again, Mark Mello was influential in making up that list. This is the research article that talks about the keystone plant genera. National Wildlife condensed this study into a list, thank goodness. Doug Tallamy's The Nature of Oaks is a well-written story and tells a lot about the different insects that use oaks. And this last one is an overview of the research that's been done on insect decline. Okay. I have no idea what time it is, but I hope we have time for questions.
Yeah, we do have time for questions, Beth. And we have a question from Betty. I think that's Betty. And she asks, does the evening primrose cultivar act as a host?
Okay, so they're not as well as the native. All right, I'll say that for sure. They have done a lot of research on native versus cultivars. And what they have found in general is that the native supports the population or supports the organism better than a cultivar. However, they're also finding that there's some plasticity within species that will switch and will utilize some of these cultivars, and so they will still be supported. All right. The example I can tell you that I remember right now is Norway maple versus sugar maple. All right. Norway maples support 16% of what sugar maples support for insects. Okay, so that sort of gives you an idea. It probably will still, and it's a great for pollinators. All right, it's fabulous for pollinators. The native bees love it. All right, any other questions? You have another question?
I don't see any other questions in our chat box, but I do want to encourage folks to just make sure that you are on our mailing list, because Beth often hosts a walk with us during the summer and other type of educational activities. And as she did mention, we will be working with Friends of Trees and about 20 other groups to celebrate Earth Day through Arbor Day. So in April, we'll have a lot of events happening. The other thing is we have more upcoming webinars. So if you're interested in those, please sign up. And Beth, I can't thank you enough. I've learned so much today.
Thanks.
I'm so excited. I'm gonna have to watch
Okay.
this again because a lot of it just went right over my head. But thank you so much for joining us on this little snowy Saturday afternoon. Anybody else have any questions? Great. And as I mentioned, we are recording this, so once we get it onto our website, you could go look at it there, and Beth's resources will be shared. And again, thank you, Beth. This has been wonderful.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Good luck gardening.